I wanted to show you that Friday and Saturday this week, our church board had a retreat and had some good quality time together as we're seeking God's will and thinking about the future and what God would have for us. We went up to a beautiful little conference center on Lake Geneva. We're sitting out on a point, water on three sides, and so it was beautiful, and you know, a whole bunch of us not sleeping in our normal bed, so we were probably up at dawn on Saturday and got to see a little sunrise on the other side, and just wanted to keep you a little updated with where we were and what we did. As we're slowly working our way through Galatians, I arrive at Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 through 12 today. Paul was devastated. He had spent, I don't know how long, in this area of Galatia, which is modern-day Turkey. And he had started this church. And he had left, and we don't know if it was weeks or months later, but other people came and convinced them that really if they wanted to be part of the family of God, that they had to do a whole lot of other things. Like they couldn't eat at Red Lobster because they couldn't have lobster crab. Famous Dave's was out because the pulled pork, bacon double cheeseburgers were out, the whole circumcision issue and a bunch of other things, and convinced them in order to be part of the family of God, you had to perform all of these other things. Now, we think that's silly, but sometimes we substitute our own little performance metrics in the way. And when Paul heard what they'd done, he was devastated that the Galatians had so quickly abandoned what he called the gospel. So the question that remains today, and I want to talk about, because we use the word a lot, I guess I wanted to define it. The question is, what is the gospel? And there's a lot at stake here. If we don't remember, if we forget or let other things become it, we quickly degenerate into a social club or a legion of moral strivers. I like that one. So what is the gospel? And here's why. When you get to an ancient letter, Galatians is one thing that you would expect to find in verse 6 is you would expect to find thanksgiving. Like we read in Philippians. I thank my God every time I remember you because of your partnership in the gospel from the first until now. That's what you'd expect to find. This big Thanksgiving section. We might call it a buttering up section. Paul is not even concerned about buttering up. He just launches in verse 6. He says this, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, and so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. I like that sentence. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. So what's the gospel? First thing, I got to tell you, we live in a mess. I look at this young man in his room, and it brings me back to a son of ours and the way his room looked. And there is a mess that we live in. And I got to tell you the truth, the mess was here long before you came. It was here long before you were born. It was here long before you became a teenager. It was here long before you became an adult. And I got to tell you, it's your parents' fault. And I know what you're thinking. Finally, someone agrees with me. Someone sees it. It's your mom's fault. It's your dad's fault. You know, your dad got mad and and when your mom, she came, you know how she was. Your parents caused it. Well, some of it. Then I got to tell you who else's fault. Grandma and Grandpa's fault. What? My Nana? You're blaming my Nana? Yes, I am. See, all you see is you see the good Nana now. The one that sends $25 for ice cream money. Not the one who would give your mom and dad a speech over when they asked for a quarter. You know the speech. What do you think we are, made of money? Go play outside. That was the real Nana that you never knew. It was Grandpa's fault too. And by the way, it was great-grandma's fault. And I don't know what you call them. Papa, Gigi, Yaya. I don't know what this names now. I lose track of them, and I have no idea. It was their fault. There's a pattern here. We are the result of a lot of people ahead of us, and we inherit the good, and we inherit some other stuff. We inherit the selfishness or the worry or the anxiety or the pride or the anger or the temper, all the things. And it's not really your parents' fault. They learned it from their parents and their parents. It's really a humanity issue. You are harmed by the mess that's around you. In my hometown, there was a series of people in this one. There was a school, and they did all this testing and all this stuff. And there was one school, and over a period of 30 years, there was this outsized incidence of cancer for people that went to the school. And then as they went back and looked at it, guess what? It was built on top of what used to be an armaments storage facility in World War II. And so then they had to tear down the school, and they moved it 2 miles down and build another one. Sometimes we inherit messes that's not of our own doing. And everybody in here has been impacted to some degree by something negative. If I caught you on the right day, you know that day when nothing's gone right, I might only have to say one word and you can just go. Because it reminds you of mom, or it reminds you of dad, or it reminds you of something else. Let me tell you one other thing about the mess that we have. You caused it too. I'd love to be able to blame everything on everybody that came before. No, you caused it. There's all kind of exit ramps you could have taken. There were stop signs. There were lots of little clues along the way. Billboards, places you could have turned off the road. But you had, no, I'm going to go down it. Because they need to hear, and I feel better getting this off my chest. So if you are in the process of causing it or furthering it or keeping the tradition going, I have two words for you this morning. Stop it. So much of life would be better if we just stop doing dumb. And we all do dumb. There's all things we do. We haven't learned our lesson after all these years. Well, that's just me. I'm just a procrastinator. And I didn't get it done. When did you know about it? 8 months ago? So you thought you'd start it on Friday. And once you've stopped doing dumb, just turn around and start doing smart. That's part of it. There's a lot of good things that happen in life just by that. All of us have contributed to our mess. All of us live, at least in part, in the bed that we've made. And all of us, to some extent, still do or still fight that tendency. It is what we all have within us. The parts of the early church called it original sin. Other people called it something else. But it's this inherent weakness. It's this flaw that we all have. And our flaws might be all different, but we're all flawed. So the question we then have is, how do we live in the mess? Now, I'd love to be able to say you can immediately clean up the mess. It'll all be good the rest of your life. You'll never have to ever deal with the mess again. And we will have to live with the mess. And sometimes the mess rises up and bites us. To parents, you'll understand this. There have been times, I'm sure, you've heard a noise or you forgot something and you went downstairs after you've gone to bed in the dark, and yes, it happened. You know what I'm talking about. The worst pain anybody can feel. You stepped on a Lego. We step on Legos through life. So, as I said before, the first thing we do is stop adding to the mess around us. And one of the things we do that, one of the best ways we do, is we need to start making things right. Well, how do I make things right? One of the things we have to do first is we have to come to grips with ourselves. And one of the first things we do is realize that I'm not all that I'm cracked up to be. That maybe I'm in need of redemption. And so all of us at some point in life have to come to grips with a God and says, God, I am flawed. I've made a mess. I need you to make it right. Because everything I do is I end up making a mess out of things. I'm too consumed with pride and anger and bitterness and grudges and a whole host of other things. So you have to make things right with God. We approach God out of humility, out of simple faith. I'm tired of calling the shots myself. I give my life to you. The other thing we have to do is we got to start getting comfortable making things right with other people. Yeah, including him. That one person that you don't want to make things right with because you feel like if you make things right with them, you will have let them win. You feel like it's better to hold on to it. No, you're going to have to do that as well. Let me just offer that it's probably not a good idea. You're probably not letting them win by letting them live rent-free in your brain. You're not also helping your insides by carrying this grudge around. Every time they walk in a room, that knot forming and you feeling that that's not good for you either. But you think if you just let it go, somehow you've let them win. Sometimes we have to stop. We have to make things right with ourselves. By the way, if you've gone to God for forgiveness, then you need to forgive yourself. You think your standard is somehow better, higher, tougher than God's would be? There's no perfect people. None. Nobody's perfect. Time to get comfortable with yourself, even your history. And I know that's tough. In fact, Paul wrote this whole chapter in Romans 7. The good that I want to do, I find it's awful hard to do it. Because even though I want to do good, I find this evil that's right here with me. At the end, he was so frustrated, and I think Paul was not speaking about his life. He was speaking in behalf of a larger humanity when he says, I keep wanting to do good. I keep finding myself doing bad. And at the end he goes, what a wretched man I am. Who on earth will deliver me from this death that I see around me? And the next ring of hope is thanks be to God. And in Romans chapter 8, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So I have good news this morning in the gospel is that this, God is active even in the midst of the mess. Sometimes you hear people questioning, if there is such a thing as a God, if there is God, then why on earth does He allow all this mess to happen? You've heard that. It's funny how people want God to step in and keep them from doing all the bad stuff, but don't want God to step in and keep them from doing all the stuff that they think is fun. You can't have it both ways. And God's response to the mess is an interesting one. He didn't just decree, He didn't just wipe everybody out, He didn't do any of that. What He did was He said, I'm going to come down and live in their mess myself. Which He did. Now, you've heard a frustrated parent say, probably my mom said something like this, in between saying, why don't you boys be more like your cousins, Judd and Jeff? I heard that all the time growing up. Well, Judd and Jeff lived on the farm. They're the only two people they had. They didn't know anybody else. If they didn't get along, they had to go play with the cows. So there was a little different pressure. But sometimes my mom would say, ooh, I'm going to get you to clean your room even if it kills me. I wonder if God looked down at us and said, I'm going to get them to straighten out their world even if it kills me. And you know what? It did. Willingly. Or should I say, we did. Willingly take Him to a cross. God allowed all the anger, all the selfishness, all the violence that the world possessed to be used against Him. All the political power of Rome, combined with the corrupt religious world of His time, combined together and said, we are finally determined what we're going to do with you. We're going to put you on a cross, and that will take care of the situation. And they didn't see it all along that He was willingly going. Interestingly enough, in the Gospels, the enemy, Satan, saw what was going on and said, whoa, Jesus, you don't have to do that. You don't have to go to the cross. In fact, if you'll just bow down to me, I'll give you all the kingdoms. Or why don't you go up to that kind of temple and throw yourself off, and then when you land, everybody will know you're God, and you'll force them to see you're God, and everything will be fine. And that wasn't it either. Tried everything to get Him not to go on the cross. And He did. And then 3 days later rose from the dead. In the first century, if you were Jewish, you expected that at the end of life there would be a resurrection. But not in the middle of now. All of a sudden, the resurrection was a reality. It happened in the midst, and they saw it. And He makes this new life available to everyone and everything. If no one ever believes something happened the first Easter. The death and resurrection changed everything. We can become part of this new life. All of us through simple faith. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have eternal life. And then He says this new life is for everyone. Not just you. Here's what we have done, a lot of Christians down through history. Yay, God. Thank you. Yay, God, you forgave me. I'm living a better life, a new life. I have better habits. Everything's good. I'm going to be over here in the corner until either my death or you come back and I can get to go to heaven. The whole world can do its whole thing. I'll be over there. And we get a little moat and build a moat of safety around us and keep ourselves walled off from everybody else and everything, from our neighbors, from our friends, from family. And we go to our corner and just wait for God to call us home. Think of some of the old spirituals. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. If heaven's not my home, oh Lord, what will I do? Some of you remember that song. Or some glad morning when this life is over, I'll fly away. It's all through it. Here's something else. We are now part of this great renewal, transformation project. We are the people that God has chosen to work to bring this new life to other people. I am not redeemed. My life is not protected, blessed, whatever, in order for me to just sit off in the corner and enjoy it. I'm called to get involved. I'm called to mix it up. I'm called to have relationships. I'm called to be a good presence in this world. In Romans 8:21, it's one of my favorite passages. It's interesting. I don't think we ever take it to heart. Here's what Paul writes when he says, the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage and be brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. Let me decode that a little bit. Somehow, what's happened to you is supposed to have ripple effects for the whole world. When we give the Well Water Project, when we give sometimes at Christmas to bless people who are serving God in very impoverished small places, we do things. That's what we're doing. We're working to help bring light and to make things better for other people. We give mission efforts around the world. We decide we'll be there for friends and colleagues when they're going through things with the hopes that their life might be a little different. We don't do it so we'll feel good. We don't do it for any of that reason, because we're part of this great renewal project that we're called to help God in doing. Paul states that we are created in Christ to do good works. James tells us that faith without works is dead. And so we're called to a life of transformation. We're called to be this word, it's an old word, holy. And it conjures up images in our head that I don't think is helpful. It conjures up images of this unattainable moral perfection. And I think maybe an attainable moral sensitivity might be a better description. Holiness does mean that we are to become more Christ-like. More and more and more. And actually eventually win out over some old ways and old habits and old pathways that bring us into a bad place. First, we need to be willing to let go of some of those old ways. That's where the rubber meets the road. So often, and somehow it's usually after I just, I jumped off a scale and I go, oh my goodness, I got to do better than this. Starting right now, I'll do better than this. And then I get in a car and I drive the car and it's 4 in the afternoon, it's a hot day, and there's an ice cream place. I'll start tomorrow. We all do that. About a host of other things. I'm spending too much money. I need to go in some fiscal discipline right after this sale at Kohl's is done. The thing about holiness, the thing about transformation, is it always involves others. It can't be out on an island. It's not this old model of we're going to go and live in a convent, or we're going to be monks and we're going to separate ourselves from everybody and not be fouled. I suppose that's one way to do it, but it doesn't make any difference to anyone. I think of the Shakers who came from Great Britain in the early 1800s and hit our shores, and their whole thing was even if you're married, you join the Shakers. The men lived off in that dorm. The women lived off in that dorm. And you're pledged to be separate and abstinent and no marriages for the rest of your life. And you go, wow, that's interesting. Why aren't there Shakers today? Because when they got off the boat, the men went over here and the women went over there. And there tends to not be a second generation of groups like that. It's funny how that works out. Holiness always involves other people. It's not just me and my island. I'm called to be in the midst of other lives and other people. Sometimes that's tough when you're a pastor. You only spend time with you wonderful, good people. When do I get to talk to the nasty, brutish people that exist where you guys? That's one of the reasons why in the winter I like to ref high school basketball games. Do you know people sometimes scream at me in the winter and call me names? And to some of the guys I ref with, they call me Rev now. That's just how it works. It's just a way of keeping, in that world a little bit. Holiness not only involves others, it flows from love and serves others. And it actually eagerly participates in this great redemptive project. Let's talk about this great redemptive project just for a second. Because of this great redemptive project, remember at the beginning when I said this mess we're in, it's your parents' fault, and you went, yes. Part of that great redemptive project is you don't have to further that anymore. Your kids and your grandkids aren't overcoming the things you had to overcome. That's part of the great redemptive project. Part of the great redemptive project is I'm building a legacy of faith, not only for my kids, but will go down 3 generations, 4 generations from now. Now my family tradition will bring smiles to the people after me and not what it brought to me. That's great redemptive project. Great redemptive project is we're here together as the body of Christ. We're going to try to bless as many of people as we can that we come in contact with. We do this collectively in a lot of different ways, but we also got to do it individually. And it can start with just sometimes sitting with someone, writing a note with someone, to someone, simply saying, "Hey, I'm here. If you need something. If you feel alone, join me on Sunday. I promise the other people there will love you. You've been put on notice. Anybody I drag in here, you got to love. And anybody you drag in here, I got to love. That's what the rules are. It eagerly anticipates, looks forward, praises, celebrates this great redemptive project. So I know I've talked a long time. Let me just distill it down. So what's the gospel? Gospel's this: we're hopefully self-centered, angry, bitter, and turned inward. Even if we're turned inward with an outward smile, we're still turned inward. Left to ourselves, we make a mess. Into our collective mess, into my personal mess, Christ came and allowed me to do our worst to Him. And He died on a government, people-supported cross and then rose again and offers us and your neighbor and your friend and your enemy this new life. The new life that transcends governments, the new life that transcends culture and everything old. We access this new life through simple faith. Not simple faith, and I have to go to the store with you so you dress correctly. Not simple faith, and I have to go to the voting booth with you to be sure you vote correctly. Not this simple faith. You have to believe, and then you have to come around to my way of thinking and go to my favorite restaurant and all this other stuff. This new life transcends governments, culture, everything old, and we access it through faith. And then we're called to live a life of faithfulness. Not perfection. When I got married, I was called to live a life of faithfulness, forsaking all others, not perfection. That went away early. And I was called to participate in this renewal. And so the world around me, my family, my friends, the larger world can literally be different because of this grand project. I want your life to be different. I want you to celebrate. I want you to worship Jesus Christ. I want you to be part of this God's family. But one of the reasons why is because there is a world that we can make better. That world is your life, our life, and a greater world we all live in. That's the gospel.